Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Now, if you've been watching a lot of streams lately, you're seeing a ton of healers pivoting over to Holy Paladin. I wanted to make the video talking about more than just the basic reason of like one spec being really powerful, and also just about the entirety of the meta, because whenever a healer becomes dominant, it's not just healers versus other healer specs in the game. A lot of times it's going to be based off of what the rest of the meta is looking like when it comes to tanks, when it comes to DPS as well. Throughout most seasons that we've seen over the years, having the healer be the sort of like flex role that brings in that last bit of utility is insanely common. Whether it is certain specs bringing the battle reds or bloodlust or certain types of dispels, all of those things really start coming about. So starting it off, what makes Paladin good, or just Holy Paladin good in general? Obviously, there's going to be like the 10.1.5 changes that are coming around the corner, but more so than that is the dungeons themselves are extraordinarily burst heavy, particularly on Tyrannical. There's really, really ridiculous high amounts of burst damage that's happening, whether it's like Forge Master Gorek and Nelthuris, whether it's the third boss, the Sentinel guy in Uldaman, which has like a super nasty bleed as well as bursty party damage. There's a lot of ways that players can get like comboed, killed off, and having damage reduction, immunities, party-wide damage reduction, and just a heavy burst healing profile makes Paladin extremely well suited for what's going to be coming around the corner. A Dispel profile, having poisons and diseases pretty much covers all of your bases, and having a melee kick. Now, one of the most popular things of Season 2 is the fact that kicks are not as insanely important, which leads DPS players to play more ranged in meta, since range is also just stronger. But then when you have more ranged, you have less kicks, less interrupts, and so if you're missing any of the few kicks that are in Season 2 compared to Season 1, then you're going to have a big problem, because they're also still very deadly. So being able to bring your healer as a melee interrupt in addition to your tank as a melee interrupt allows you to play these 2 or 3 ranged DPS metas, which we're more so leaning towards. Things like Devastation of Ochre being like insanely powerful, a lot of casters, a lot of Shadow Priests being insanely powerful. Shadow, very well known for having terrible interrupts, right? And so when you have these sort of metas shaping in general, the healers are extraordinarily sensitive to what the tanks and the DPS want to run or are going to be running to begin with. DPS meta as well to cap it off, in addition to Lust, Battle Res, Kick, Survivability, just doing lots of damage. It's all about survivability. These dungeons, it's not just, oh, like you can kind of tank a bit of damage, oh, you can self-heal, whatever. Squishy classes just like don't function in these really, really high keys. And of course, the high key meta naturally trickles down to everybody else. So even if you're in a position and you're doing like your 20s and 22s, the meta still impacts your ability to get into groups, whether or not the reasons are actually, correct or just for you to get declined because you're not bringing this spec, this class, this whatever, which is, believe me, as a priest player, very frustrating. Now, you're even getting to a point where DPS are finally making these videos and finally really coming to the realization that damage isn't really winning your dungeons. Not in the way that most people think it is, at least. A dungeon like Nelthuris is probably the best example that using the chains to high efficiency and pulling all these hunters together and just killing them off with chains makes the rest of the dungeon insanely free, to the point that you're going to be able to chest absurdly high dungeons, and the ceiling that you have to break through in order to chest the highest of keys in something like Nelthuris is not doing enough damage to the trash or pulling large enough or whatever. It's literally just surviving the boss fights like the Magma Tusk or Gorek, so that you can actually get to the last boss and just kill it. Like, that's it. I'm having a point where like 24s and 25s for something like Nelthuris, we're chesting with, 3, 4, 5 minutes to spare if we can survive the boss fights. But if we can't, then obviously the run is bricked. So you're seeing DPS already running Spore Cloaks, so they're going to be able to survive and really popularizing this. But certain specs, like maybe Enhanced Shaman, who are not able to survive at these higher levels, or just kind of Shaman in general, are going to be seeded out at the highest levels because they're not going to have the survivability that other specs are going to be able to bring to the table. I've talked in the past about healers being very strong, and when healers are very strong, you can pump up health pools really quickly, which means the damage of dungeons and raids gets escalated as a result, gets bumped up as a result. Furthermore, what this means is that specs that have good personal defensives are the ones that are going to be able to survive the big incoming damage, who can survive the big burst damage. Because when dungeon damage or maybe like healer power is low, yeah, survivability and defensives are still important, but a lot of times there's more breathing room to heal through that boss fight or to heal through that burst damage than there is in the meta that we're at right now, where everybody's health pool is just yo-yoing like crazy. Capping that off for the DPS meta. Now, when it comes to the tank meta, obviously tanks run everything when it comes to Mythic Plus, and so there's a little bit, I would say, of, well, if the tank runs what they want to run, everybody else is going to start playing around them, which I've seen in the past, and it's very true. But you're also seeing players moving away from Prot Paladin to go into Vengeance Demon Hunter, because I didn't even think it was possible, but Vengeance just doing more damage than Prot Paladin is doing. The survivability and maybe just the feeling for tanks and security for tanks seems like it's a lot higher when you have a reliable cheat death that's not reliant on like Ardent Defender, popping that in advance so you can eat the cheat death, or what is it, the Sentinel? I forget the name of it. Whenever you drop low, you get your Guardian of Ancient Kings proc every like 45 seconds or something. Like those things are nice, but sometimes, as tanks can attest, you just get like wombo comboed into a pull and you're just dead. And so being able to rely on something like a cheat death is insanely helpful. When you're able to have the like high-low levels, I would say, for something like a Vengeance Demon Hunter. Obviously, not a tank expert, but one of my experiences as a healer is that there's certain pulls where the Vengeance is just invincible for the 10, 20, 30 seconds, whatever it is, of having those defensives up. And so when you couple that with also having the Holy Paladin on hand, who can drop sack onto the tank, who can bop the tank, for example, as they're running to grab a whole bunch of mobs together, for example, like a Neltherus pull. If you're going to like run through, bop the tank, he can rally everything together, everybody runs in and then grabs the chains and you can just snap them very easily. That makes a really insane difference, and it's a very potent combination to be able to bring to the table for some of the really challenging pulls that we have going on. Because DPS are very strong, and the relative health of mobs per key level, is a weird concept, is pretty low. So what you can do is you can just rally together a heap of mobs, and you have so much damage as damage dealers that you can kind of kill things before they kill you much more rapidly than I've seen in other seasons. Those things I think are insanely important and also lend itself to where Holy Paladin is going to be rising. Final point I would also make is, like I said, there's a lot of high damage and high burst going on in these dungeons, and Holy Paladin, even before the 10.1.5 changes that are coming around to the table, which offer some more talent options and some more variety, but also it looks like they have some very powerful burst even when they don't have wings up. It looks like the spec is not going to just be like, oh, if I have wings, I can heal, and if I don't, I'm dead. You're going to be able to have the burst output that's required for a lot of this incoming damage. And Paladin also has a number of like really short, bursty cooldowns, which is fantastic for the areas where people are going to need the largest amount of output, which is sort of these combos where people are getting hit for like 40, 50, 60% of their life per incoming hit. It's almost like we're getting back to like a Halls of Valor Hirja or something like that, with the bubble going up and having to stand into that. But these guys don't actually have any inversions. So you're seeing Paladin's burst output, not necessarily its ticking damage healing or its ability to heal through rot, even though that is good, but it's mainly the burst that's going to be killing off players, because at the highest key levels of groups, you can bring the off healing you need, you can bring the self-sustain that you need for things like the third boss in Halls of Infusion, and you can eventually kind of muddle your way through that boss fight and make sure that you survive. But I've seen, you know, what is it, the no healer groups and stuff like that doing Halls of Infusion on Tyrannical like 24 because they had enough off healing. And while a lot of that gets nerfed in 10.1.5, I don't anticipate having like Augvoker be as impactful when it comes to a 5-man environment unless they make some more changes. At the moment, it seems a little, well, if its high damage goes through, that's another story entirely, but I think it's going to be more of a raid spec because of how its burst and like amplification profile works. But that's a video for another time. Let me know if you guys want to see something like that. But I do believe Paladin's HPS is just going to be much more effective than a lot of other healers in their profiles, and I'm already seeing it with Disc Priest, even though I have crazy absorbs and damage reduction I can provide to people when I need to, that the raw HPS, whether it's ticking damage fights or burst damage fights, is starting to peter out at these higher key levels, and it looks like Paladin, with the absolute Swiss Army knife of the class utility that they bring, is going to be a must-need for when it comes to a dungeon environment. And if tanks and DPS are not going after their paladin specialization, then it falls to the healer to be able to bring it to the table. So that's why I think Holy Paladin on the rise, and you're going to see a massive pivot towards it as we get closer to the Great Push and as we get closer to 10.1.5. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and be sure to check out our Patreon of these lovely patrons who make all the content possible. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.